Well, if you thought the leadership inside the Canadian military could not possibly get any worse, the leaked documents that we have obtained of an internal survey sent to all Canadian soldiers will show you that however bad you think it is, it's much worse. This survey that was sent out to all Canadian soldiers was designed to help the military detect and combat hateful conduct and radicalization. One of the questions presented to soldiers in this survey asks them if they have purchased, quote, extremist merchandise, such as a Make Canada Great Again hat in the last 2 to 5 years. Apparently, the military seems to think that rooting out those dangerous right-wing extremists that want to make Canada great again is a priority, not, fixing whatever this is. Or perhaps trying to solve the attrition and recruitment crisis, or the dire equipment and ammunition shortage. Yes, we are supposed to be on a war footing. We share a northern border with a country that is at war with an ally. But right now, rooting out those extremists is more important. Make Canada great again, in the eyes of our military, in the eyes of our last line of defense, is now an extremist slogan. Now on this show, we are going to be exposing the entirety of this survey sent out to Canadian soldiers, a survey that we have exclusively obtained here at True North. But before we do, be sure to drop a like on this video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this: why is the Canadian Armed Forces doing this to itself? Let me know your answer in the comments below, and let's get into it. So the same military that seems more concerned about stockpiling tampons in male washrooms than they are about stockpiling ammunition for our soldiers on deployment is shockingly very concerned now about the prevalence of right-wing extremists in the ranks.
How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Apparently not.
And just a few months ago, NATO was telling Canada to prepare for war. So of course, the Canadian military leadership, in an effort to battle harden our troops and get them focused on killing the enemy, they have decided to send out this independent survey to try to combat right-wing extremists in the military. Can't think of a better way to prepare for war with Russia and China. This survey is part of a larger independent study led by Ontario Tech University and University of New Brunswick titled Hateful Conduct and Right-Wing Extremism in the Canadian Armed Forces. So the survey begins by asking soldiers if they suspect members of their current unit or members outside of their unit to belong to extremist groups. Following that set of opening questions, they are then presented with this series of questions, asking them if in the past 2 to 5 years they have done any of the following, which include liked an extremist group post on social media, donated to an extremist group cause, purchased an extremist group merchandise, such as a Make Canada Great Again hat, provided strategic advice or training to an extremist group, or formerly been a member of an extremist group. The questions continue and get more bizarre, such as, in the past 2 to 5 years, have you sported a tattoo or clothing with extremist symbols or phrases? Verbally or physically attacked a member of a racial, religious, sexual, or other minority group because of their identity? Provided military weapons or other resources to an extremist group? Searched for and watched extremist music and or videos? Or openly displayed extremist symbols such as a swastika or a Confederate flag? By the way, what is extremist music? I can't imagine what that might be, like Confederate war songs? And imagine being stupid enough to say yes to any of those questions. But the survey just gets weirder. You see, the questions then transition to asking soldiers to indicate to what extent they agree with the following statements. And we're going to read these statements out to you. To what extent they agree with the statement, Jews have too much control over important institutions like the media, politics, and the economy. Or, Canada appears to be moving toward fascism under the current government. Non-white immigration trends are a threat to white people. Immigrants bring with them values that don't belong in Canada. The federal government is corrupt and untrustworthy. Minority groups are provided with too many supports. There is a natural hierarchy among races. Preferably blacks and whites should not get married. Jews have too much influence in Canada. The federal government restricted personal freedoms too much during the COVID pandemic. Oh, I don't know how anyone could possibly answer that question. They didn't restrict anyone's freedoms. Jews try to take advantage of having been victims during the Nazi era, and the Muslim culture fits well in Canada. So the survey goes on with the following statements. It is a good thing to allow marriages between 2 men and 2 women. Women should take their role as wives and mothers more seriously. We need to protect our own culture from the influence of other cultures. The majority of Muslims find terrorism justifiable. When jobs are scarce, men should have more rights to a job than women. There's nothing immoral about homosexuality. And then here is the last page of statements. I would be reluctant to send my children to a school where the majority of pupils are immigrants. Canada is letting in too many immigrants into this country. The Canadian government favors immigrants over veterans. The current government does not support military personnel or those who have served. Being gay is still considered a negative factor toward occupational progression, and there are too many minorities in the military. So those are the questions asked to Canadian soldiers in this survey, which of course the military seems to think is very important. What exactly do the people behind this survey and the military think they're going to get out of this? Do they genuinely think extremists are going to answer yes to any of these questions? That the data they're going to get from this is actually valuable in any way? And furthermore, take a look at some of these questions. I mean, yes, there are obvious questions in this survey that an extremist would agree with, quite obviously. But then there are questions like the federal government restricted freedoms too much during the pandemic. Are you an extremist for saying you strongly agree to that question? Are you an extremist for saying you strongly agree to the statement that the Canadian government favors immigrants over veterans? Or that the current government does not support military personnel or veterans? Both of those statements one could easily argue is true. How many newcomers do you see in this country on the street, homeless, begging for money and lining up for food banks or addicted to drugs? You see a lot more veterans than you do new immigrants, that's for sure. And how about the question, Canada is letting in too many immigrants into this country? The majority of Canadians strongly agree or somewhat agree with that statement. So are the majority of Canadians now extremists? Or the statement that we need to protect our culture from the influence of other cultures? Wanting to protect your culture is not extremist, it's human instinct. Now, the woman behind this research study is Dr. Barbara Perry, the anti-hate researcher from the Ontario Tech University. Now, Dr. Perry is credited for coming up with a list of allegedly 300 active right-wing extremist groups in this country. Now, this list of 300 active far-right hate groups has been cited by the Canadian government for justification to advance anti-hate and censorship legislation. But when True North back in 2022 sought access to that list of 300 active far-right hate groups through a Freedom of Information request, Dr. Barbara Perry went to extreme lengths to prevent that list from being released. And recently, actually, an Ontario Privacy Commissioner ruled that that list would remain private. So we as Canadians aren't actually allowed to know who these 300 active far-right hate groups are. But Dr. Perry gets to work alongside the Canadian Armed Forces and try to run a study to root out and combat right-wing extremists in the military. Because that's the issue that we need to take seriously right now. That's the real concern right now. But let's get into the details of the military. The biggest issue facing our military, as every Canadian knows, is the fact that no one is signing up and too many troops are leaving. Right now, the military claims to have a force of 63,000 soldiers, well below the authorized strength of 71,000, a shortfall of approximately 8,500. The Canadian military seeks to have 5,900 new recruits each year, a target they have not reached for several years in a row. And there are reports that upwards of 9,000 troops are leaving each year. So you do the math. Now, you would think that Canada, with our longest coastline in the world, would have a world-class Navy. But right now, our Navy is far from it. In fact, last year, the Vice Admiral of Canada's Navy, Vice Admiral Angus Top, she made a YouTube video telling the world, actually, that there weren't enough sailors to operate our fleet. And one of the new efforts by the Royal Canadian Navy to try to get new sailors into the ranks is apparently to scrap one of the Royal Canadian Navy's traditional marching songs, Hearts of Oak.
Come, cheer up, my lads, 'tis to glory we steer, to add something more to this wonderful year.
Heart of Oak, according to a Defense Department spokeswoman, is too sexist and too colonial for the modern Royal Canadian Navy. As she says, first performed in 1760, Hard to Vote contains language that does not align with the values and ethos of today's Royal Canadian Navy or the broader Canadian Armed Forces. Specifically, it includes references to colonialism and slavery, and language that is not representative of all those who serve in today's Navy. Furthermore, Bill Blair, Canada's Defence Minister, has endorsed the scrapping of the Royal Canadian Navy marching song, saying, "I think the Royal Canadian Navy has every right to continue to advance and modernize, and if they want to have an anthem that's appropriate for them and theirs alone, how can we say no?"
How about no?
Canada's a diverse country. We need great people in the Canadian Armed Forces, and great people for us includes great women, great Indigenous candidates, great diverse Canadians are all part of what makes a great and strong Canadian Armed Forces. Actually, you know what makes a great and strong Canadian Armed Forces? Strong and lethal soldiers. Deadly soldiers. A military that is able to kill the enemy and win battles. Not diversity. Not more women. The majority of the members of the Canadian Armed Forces are white Canadian men. Why is that such a bad thing? The majority of people who want to sign up for the military are likely white men. Don't you think you should be trying to appeal to the people that are most likely going to sign up for the military in the first place? Instead of denigrating our history, denigrating our country, humiliating our troops with tampons in male washrooms, telling patriots and nationalists who want to make Canada great again that owning a hat that says "Make Canada Great Again" is actually extremist? That's the insane part here. Our military leadership probably thinks the majority of Canadian troops, who are likely white men and are patriotic and nationalists, they probably think that they are extremists. That's insane. That is absolute insanity. So I asked the question again, and it's a comment question of this video. Why is the Canadian military doing this to itself? Let me know your answer in the comments below. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.